Sagi. Dov Sagi was one of my first students. I'm embarrassed to say that he doesn't look it than I do, but about 30 years ago, and worked at the time on the psychophysics of spatial frequency channels, introducing psychophysics to my lab. He then went to do a postdoc with Bela Yulish, who you've probably heard about because he was the one who introduced random dot stereograms he did a lot of work on random dot stereograms to use stereopsis, the perception of depth by the two eyes when there are no other cues, which in general we have lots of other cues. But he was also very important in the subject of textiles, defining what features were important for vision and which features would be easily separated from other features and texture segregation. And when Dov came back to Israel to Weizmann, he started using texture segregation for the study of perceptual learning. He did a number of amazing and innovative work in the study of perceptual learning and showing that sleep helps. No, not during the lecture. It's after the lecture you're supposed to sleep. And studying the rivalry in perception between adjacent features, flankers, what they call. He studied motion-induced blindness, a new feature, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I say that because he's famous in the world of perceptual learning especially, but in general in psychophysics for many of the different studies that he and his colleagues did at Weizmann. And why do I say Mapach? Because everything that we know, because he taught us about perceptual learning, he's now going to tell us is wrong, and he's got a new one. Something like that? Yeah. Dov Sagi.
Yes. So what I'm going to speak about today is about the concept of specificity in perceptual learning, and show how it can be generalized. And this is really different from what we presented 20 years ago with Avikani and this kind of mahapach, like Shaul said. So perceptual learning. Perceptual learning is maybe definition, sensory sensitivity improves with practice. There are some old studies like McKee and Westheimer from 78. It is the case of visual acuity. You repeat this task of localization, relative localization between two lines. You need to judge whether the upper one is to the... Do you see? Yeah. Whether the upper one is left or right relative to the lower one. Initially, subjects have 10 seconds of arc threshold, displacement threshold, which is about the size of a photoreceptor in the fovea. And then after a few days of practice, they can do it with 5 seconds of arc, and after many years of practice, they can do it even with 1 second of arc, which is a world record, and even documented in the Guinness World Record. So the human eye is capable of judging relative position with remarkable accuracy, reaching limits between 3 to 5 seconds of arc. In April 1984, Dr. Dennis Levi, the College of Optometry, University of Houston, Texas, repeatedly identified the relative position of a thin bright green line within 0.85 second of arc. And this is equivalent to the displacement of some 6 millimeters at a distance of 1.6 kilometers. So this is really remarkable, and this is a result of practice and training. You can see it also with contrast sensitivity. So that's a way to measure visual resolution. You map the contrast required to see grading of some spatial frequencies, like you see low spatial frequency, high spatial frequency. And with practice, this is called 6 months, you can get an improvement by a factor of 6. One of the key features of perceptual learning is specificity. You practice with a stimulus of one orientation at one location. If the learning effect is specific to this location and orientation, does not transfer to other spatial locations or orientation. One of the attractive explanations that we came up with 20 years back, and others continued with it, is that it is because of the plasticity at early stages of processing in the visual cortex, like V1, the single cells are selective for orientation, spatial frequency, and they are localized in space, so receptive fields are small. The amazing finding is that this specificity holds for a large variety of stimuli. Gratings, even faces, lines, motion, Gabor patches, and textures. So we use textures during the last 20 years, and I'll show you how this experiment works, because this is the result I'm going to describe today based on texture experiments. So what we do in the experiment, we present a texture stimulus very briefly. There are many vertical lines and 3 diagonal lines here. They are presented for 10 milliseconds. And after some variable time, stimulus onset synchrony, or S to A, we present a mask. 100 milliseconds, all these V's. The task of the subject is to identify the global orientation of these 3 tilted lines, whether they are arranged vertically or horizontally. Now, if the mask is coming very briefly after the target, let's say with small SOA, like 10 or 0 SOA, the task is impossible because you get masking. The 2 stimuli, the target and the mask, are kind of blended in the retina because of the temporal integration. So initially you need very long time to perform the task, but with practice you improve. So this is an example of a trial. Okay, it is again. So this is a stimulus, it's come after that the mask. Let's try it again. Okay, difficult. So initially it's impossible, almost impossible to perform, but after a few trials, subjects start to perform the task. And after a few days, they do it very well. So this is the way we describe the result here. This is psychometric function, percent correct, as a function of stimulus onset asynchrony, the time between the target frame and the mask frame. Performance is between 50% to 100%. 100% is perfect, 50% is just guessing chance performance, because there are 2 alternative responses, vertical or horizontal. Initially, day 1, the psychometric function is here. You need 160 milliseconds to perform the task with 100% correct, and you fail at 120, you have a chance of it. The next day, day 2, you are here, and then you improve day by day, converge to this region. No. Sorry? Who are the participants? Just the students? Well, actually, I think this one is a high school student, Shira, SW. And yeah, because what happens, we test them out. Yeah, these were high school students because they went to the army, and we tested them when they got back from the army after this girl after 32 months. So the psychometric function after 32 months is about here. So in fact, the learning result is preserved for kind of 2-3 years, at least 3 years, so probably forever, without further practice. This is another subject, Gali. Here we show the threshold as a function of number of sessions. The first day it is 130, the second day it's 90, and within 3-4 days it converges to 40-60 milliseconds. So we get the improvement of factor 2 or 3, and after 22 months, I need the tape. And after 22 months, it's still the same. Okay, so this is the long-term improvement in perceptual abilities that stays forever. And as Shaul mentioned, we showed it depends on sleep. We need sleep for consolidation. There is some complicated dependence on REM sleep. There's a slow wave sleep, which I'm not going to get to describe today. But the important result for today is a specificity. So you train in one location. So this is the upper right quadrant of the visual field. And then you test the subject at a different location, let's say it's the upper left quadrant of the visual field, and performance goes up to the initial level, the same threshold. So you start with 130, you convert to 50, and you change location, you go up to 120. And you move to another location, and again, the threshold goes up, and you get a learning. All these are single subjects, by the way.
Excuse me, what do you mean location where?
Let's say I show it to you here.
In the field of...
In the field, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is specificity for retinal location. The same way it can be shown that it's specific for location, orientation, and eye. You train with one eye, it doesn't transfer to the other. Yes?
The training was done only in the specific location or
only specific location.
Plotters,
well, some jitter, a little bit. Yeah. So in particular, the monocularity, the fact that you train with one eye and doesn't transfer to the other eye, kind of suggests strongly that this is a low-level plasticity, and probably in the primary visual cortex. And there is some evidence, but not too much, for changes in primary visual cortex activity as a result of practice, but they are not conclusive. So what are the suggested explanations? Modification of networks that encode the basic stimulus features. So this is what I said, the primary visual cortex. Also mid-level networks that receive specific inputs from the low level. This is equivalent, so this is the low level. Every cell here is responds to orientation and location and eye, probably, and sends a specific synapse to a higher level decision maker. So this is basically equivalent. The more interesting explanation that did not receive much attention is that learning is at the readout. So there is a high-level system that reads the low-level activity. But since the low-level activity is not space invariant, but it varies from location to location, you get specificity. You learn in one location, but then you go to a different location, and the neuronal response is somewhat different. Then you cannot apply the learning result to the new location. One way to tell this type of story is that if you look at the retinal mosaic, so the photoreceptors are not arranged exactly on a grid. There's some anatomical noise. So let's say if you take the hyperacuity task that I showed at the beginning, you rely really on small shifts that you need to take into account the exact relative position of the photoreceptors. And then you can have very high accuracy. Now you move to a different location, the photoreceptor mosaic is different. So you are lost. You cannot perform the task. You need to relearn the generated activity in the cortex. Even if you learn at the cortex, still the pattern of spikes and activity you will get will be different.
So you suggest that if it's not identical, then there will be something in cortex and machinery to transfer the learning.
Yeah.
Because this is different, slightly different.
Yeah, that was suggestion of Molon and Danilova in mathematics. Yeah. But that's a reasonable
Motivation. I mean, one could say, well,
That's a question.
Yeah.
That is a question we are dealing with. I'm saying that this is an open question. What I'm saying, these are alternative suggestions that I hope today to help resolve this issue. Okay? But you're not happy.
So if it was identical, what would be the mechanism for transfer according to models than law?
Well, some kind of readout mechanism that they are not specific about it, but you can imagine. I'm sure you can model it. Some kind of template matching. You learn the thing, and then you get the same information, space and time. Okay. Okay. Another phenomenon that takes place during practice, during learning, is adaptation. So this was ignored until recently, but the problem is that once you are exposed repeatedly to a stimulus, you get adapted, the sensitivity decreases in the visual system. And that's a possibility. I mean, this is something that may happen during practice because you're exposed to the same stimulus many times. And then it would be interesting to see what's happened within a session. So this is a recording of performance within a single session. This is a single subject, and we've been it 25 trials, I think, every point here. You start 100%, you start 100%, then it drops, goes up. On the average, subject's performance goes down within a session. If you average then all these curves, then you get almost perfect performance during the first 100 trials, and then performance goes down within a session. Okay, this is counterintuitive because you expect learning and improvement. And in general, the more trials you have, the higher the threshold is within a session.
So it's not tiredness?
No, we believe it is not. And yeah, I'll get to that.
But within the first session, when the task was completely new to the subject, do you see improvement during the task?
Well, during the first few trials, yes, but this is an easy task. I mean, here we start with 100% correct, but yeah, there's some kind of initial fast learning. I'll show some data later. So basically, if you have many trials, the threshold is high, 180 milliseconds. If you have a smaller number of trials, you do better. In fact, you end up today with a better threshold, 120 milliseconds. So there is some cost for repetition. So what we see that there are two forces here kind of acting. One is learning, another adaptation, and there is probably some competition between them. And this adaptation effect actually lasts for a few hours. So here we see a session that starts with 125 trials, you get 120 milliseconds. You go up to 400 milliseconds, 400 trials, the threshold goes to 160. Another 400 trials goes to 180. But if you wait 2 hours, threshold is still high. So there is a slow forgetting for this tiredness or for this adaptation process. But if you wait 8 to 10 hours, you are back to this threshold, to the 160. And there are others that describe this type of phenomena. I mean, initially it was described, in fact, by a group in Harvard. And what they showed that if you practice a textual session 4 times a day, initially, this is initial performance in the morning, 8 a.m. At 12 noon, you get worse by 10 milliseconds, and 4 p.m. you're even worse, and in the evening you are even much worse. With sleep, you can improve things. If you take a short nap, you cancel this adaptation effect. So to summarize this part, texture adaptation is a result of dense stimulation. It is local. So this is one of the reasons against fatigue, because if you move it to a different location, then you can do the task. So it's not a general type of tiredness. And it transfers between the eyes, so it's cortical, and it's similar to sensory adaptation. Okay, another result here is that adaptation affects the rate of learning. So if you have too many trials, there is no learning. Here we measured threshold morning, evening, and the next morning 3 times, and we looked for learning. So if you have 800 trials per session, the learning, these are the learning increments, are not significant. This is learning between morning and evening, during the day, learning during the night. There is some learning during the night, but it's not significant. If you have 400 trials per session, there is no learning during the day, no significant learning, but strong learning during the night. If you have only 225 trials per session, then you have some learning which is distributed equally across day and night. So we see that adaptation interacts with learning, or affect learning. Now, we believe that this is linked to contrast adaptation. Contrast adaptation means that if you're exposed to a grating of high contrast, your sensitivity is decreased, and the basic finding in this field is described here. You are exposed, this is data from Fergus Campbell from '69. So he was measuring continuously contrast sensitivity, the contrast required to detect the grating, and here it was exposed. Here it was exposed for 60 seconds to a high contrast grating. The result is that his sensitivity decreased. I mean, the threshold increased significantly by about 0.4 log units, and after adaptation, it takes about 40 seconds to recover. This adaptation effect is orientation selective and spatial frequency selective. This is the spatial frequency tuning of this adaptation effect. And it's well documented in the literature. One of the related effects is the tilt after effect, which is better known. You are exposed to high contrast tilted gratings. Like here, what you need to do is to scan this bar here. You can do it for a minute or so. And after that, shift your fixation to this point. And what happens, the 2 gratings on the right look tilted in different directions. I mean, you have to watch these gratings. You fixate here. You move your eyes here along this bar for a minute. I mean, it can be done later on. You can do it in the internet. And after that, you shift your eyes, your gaze, fixation to this point. The outcome is that these gratings, which are equal, vertical, look tilted in different directions. Okay? Opposite direction to the adapting grating, to these two.
So it's like an after image.
After effect. This is called the tilt after effect, as a result of adaptation to contrast. And in fact, you can see it now in V1 units. Same kind of shift in orientation. Now, one of the issues, I mean, when we make this, I mean, when we try to say that during texture training you get similar effects, I mean, one of the problems, because the texture trials are very brief and masked and etc., so it's kind of surprising to get the same effect, but we tested it directly during a training session of 400 trials. We measured the tilt after effects after practicing with our texture stimuli, and we get actually the standard tilt after effect. And here, the tilt after effect in the target region while in the background region, as a control, we did not find the effect. So this indicates that there is some kind of adaptation effect very similar to the classical sensory adaptation that takes place during texture training. Now, one of the interesting findings in this field of contrast adaptation is that you can reduce the effect of contrast adaptation by adapting to different orientations. So this is a study by Greenlee and Magnussen from 1988. They describe an adaptation procedure where you expose 4 seconds for vertical gratings, then 45, then vertical again, and then 45, and you watch it for a while. And then you test the adaptation effect. And these are the results. This is the maximal adaptation effect if you're exposed continuously. And this is a reduced adaptation effect if you mix, during adaptation, if you mix different orientations, differing by 45 degrees. There are 2 subjects here. No, 1 subject, 2 spatial frequencies. So this mixture actually almost kills the adaptation effect. You can mix it with orthogonal orientation, and then you get some kind of intermediate performance level, as if you have spaces between the adapting grading. So orthogonal gratings, if you mix here between vertical and horizontal instead of the diagonal, then you get adaptation. But if you mix vertical with diagonal, then adaptation is much reduced. So our goal here is to study textual learning without adaptation. That's what we were doing, and we want to remove the adaptation effect while learning. And the way we do it, we add stimuli which are tilted 45 degrees to the target, relative to the target. The same task, texture discrimination, target 10 millisecond, vertical, horizontal. We train 1 location for 4 days, 252 trials per session, and then we move day 5, we move the target to a new location. So we have the standard condition, and we have 2 dummy conditions, what we call dummy trials. We have dummy trials which are 45 degrees minus 45 degrees relative to the target, or another experiment plus 45 degrees relative to the target. And we hope that this will reduce the adaptation effect. These trials are intermixed randomly. So half of the trials are real trials, half of the trials actually have no target, just background, and subjects are guessing. They know that some trials there is no chance for them to have a correct response, or well, chance there is 50% because there is no target, so they play the game and they don't know which trial they are going to receive, whether it's a dummy trial or a real trial. And the SOAs, the difficulties are mixed randomly. And then we have a control condition, which is a standard one, but with spaced trials, just 4 seconds between trials. So this is like taking out the dummy trials, but having the same average time between real trials. And here are the results. So this is training with a standard task. Subject start. We have 3 points per day. 84 trials per point, 252 per day. So initially, they get only 5 to 10 trials before that in order to be introduced to the task, so they know what they do. Initially, it's close to 200 milliseconds the threshold. Then it goes down within the first session. There is rapid learning. Then there is no further improvement. Next day, they start with a better performance. They improve. Then they deteriorate, probably because of adaptation. And then they do better and converge to around 80 milliseconds. At the new location, we find that the threshold goes up to initial level and then rapidly converges to the same level. So this is specificity, as expected. The control condition, with the space condition shows the same result, specificity, and the learning curve.
The same number of tries?
Same number.
Or half?
Same number of tries. Takes longer, yeah.
But is it true that the learning is faster on the new location? Or
Looks like that, yes.
so not that, but it's considered not transfer?
Well, yeah, kind of. You can say that there is some transfer or something, yeah. Right. But it goes up to the initial level. Usually, I mean, I think in most previous experiments you get some speed up in the new location. I think Daphna also studied a long time ago. So now we look at the condition with the dummy trials is minus 45 degrees. So this is the learning curve, and the new location there is a complete transfer. As you see, there is a big difference between the initial performance with adaptation and without adaptation. And the plus 45 degrees dummy trials, we get a similar curve and then transfer. So this result implies that specificity is, in fact, is not a property of learning, but a property of adaptation. Okay? And the initial performance is very similar of all conditions. Maybe there is a difference in the speed of learning between the conditions, and we'll see later some analysis of this property. But basically, this is the main result. There is transfer in perceptual learning once you remove adaptation. Okay.
Those are different subjects.
Well, these are groups of subjects. Here we move to the modern era of group data, 6 subjects, every point, average of 6 subjects.
Every point?
Yeah. Of course, the different groups are different subjects, because you cannot repeat. Okay, so we summarize the data by looking at the first threshold, the last threshold, training threshold, and the transfer threshold. And then we get these diagrams with standard errors and statistics. The standard is fully specific, the standard method. The minus 45 dummy, there is complete transfer. The plus 45 degrees dummy, complete transfer. And doubling the interval with the standard method does not affect transfer, and you get specificity.
The double number of tries, right? The total number of tries.
No, you get twice the number of tries in this plus minus 45 because you get the dummy. Right. So you get right, but not in the standard in this space. Okay. The next question is, we are asking whether it's really sensory adaptation or breaking stimulus susceptibility. And for that, we interleave, we add dummy trials that are 90 degrees relative to the target, because we know from Greenlee and Magnussen that there is less effect with orthogonal gratings if you mix, and we added dummy trials that are orthogonal to the target, and we get specificity, somewhat better thresholds, because these dummy trials of 90 degrees to the target, orthogonal to the target, are 45 degrees relative to the background. So there is some mixed effect here probably, but it is still specific. So it is not just because we break the regularity or the repetibility of the trial presentation. Is it local adaptation or global adaptation to represent the target at one of 2 locations? So instead of repeating the target at the same location all the time, we presented in 2 different locations, every trial on different location, randomly mixed. So at every location you get the dummy effect because the background differed 45 degrees from the target. So from the point of view of local adaptation, you cancel the adaptation. From the point of view of global adaptation, if it's some higher level receptive field non-topographic cortical region, you should get the adaptation effect. but we get transfer. So this implies that this is local adaptation. And we double the number of trials and get still transfer. To further show that this is local adaptation, we generated kind of local dummy and locally spaced trials. So this is an example for locally spaced dummy. I mean, you get the background. This is like the minus 45 degree dummy trial, but we leave a blank here at the target location. So locally, you should get adaptation while there are the dummy trials presented. And indeed, this is specific. You get specific learning. There is kind of partial transfer maybe, but it is specific. And we have local dummy. So only at the target location we have the dummy stimulus. So you break adaptation at the target location, but not elsewhere, and you get generalization. So this seems that this type of adaptation that we have here is local in retinal coordinate. There is a visual field. And if we put together all these learning curves with adaptation and without adaptation, we get these nice curves. The empty symbols are for adapting conditions, and we see that, and we see the sign for adaptation within the day. I mean, this is day one. The first point, the beginning of the session, middle of the session, and at the end, toward the end, you see the adaptation effects getting in. Day two, you start here, you improve, and then again the adaptation effect gets in, and then you converge to a lower level of performance. And the day five, you see the specificity. On the other hand, in the conditions that there is no adaptation, subject improves within the first day and continue to improve faster. You don't see the signs of adaptation within session. And the end up is the same threshold level. This needs to be resolved yet. What does it mean that they end up at the same threshold level? And then when you transfer to the new location, there is a complete transfer of the learning. So to summarize the results, adaptive suppression due to repeated stimulation was eliminated in perceptual learning. Adaptation is generated by local stimulus rather than task repetition. Reduced adaptation during training resulted in generalized perceptual learning. Specificity is the outcome of local spatial temporal adaptive processes. Once removed, enable space invariant learning. So basically what we are saying, the specificity is not the property of perceptual learning, it's really property of short-term adaptive processes within the sensory system. And we believe that this can explain other effects of generalization. There are several effects of generalization that described recently, and like small number of trials during the first session, they generalize, so according to the new approach, you don't have enough time for the adaptation to develop. Mixed stimuli, like Merav and Shaul, and later us and others. If you mix stimuli, then again you reduce adaptation. Or easy task, when the stimuli are very different, then again you get kind of a mixture and fast learning and less adaptation. Or short pretest, when you show a small number of trials initially at the at the place that you are going to be transferred. In some experiments there are pretests, short pretests, and they are sufficient to generalize because there is no adaptation. So possible mechanism that we envision is that during textual learning, local low-level networks are being modified by adaptive processes operating on a time scale of a few seconds. There is a readout mechanism which classifies the neuronal activity according to the possible stimuli. Spatial generalization depends on the degree to which the neuronal code learned at one location is space invariant. In the absence of sensory adaptation, the code is space invariant. But adaptation introduces local network properties which prevent generalization. This is a general scheme. Now, as for the detail, how it is being done, I guess, there's a general question of space invariance in recognition, because we have higher level which encode the stimuli like in higher cortical level. Stimuli are represented regardless of the location in the visual field. So we transfer actually the problem to these type of higher levels. Yeah.
Towards the end of the learning, after many days of learning, do you still see a significant adaptation effect?
No.
Because if not, that means that the higher areas learn to be insensitive to this adaptation effect, and then you would expect not to see transfer, right? If you learn to be insensitive to adaptation effect, then you should also see transfer based on this these ideas.
Well, not necessarily, because that depends on why you don't see adaptation at these later stages of learning. And one possibility is that when you improve, then the identification is very fast. Okay, you need short time to identify the target. Now, if you look at some recent results from the visual cortex, you see that the initial response is not sensitive to adaptation. Adaptation actually gets sorry. Well, this is from a paper published last week, the group of Adam Cohn. And you see the effect of adaptation on V1 unit. And let's look at this one. So this is 4-second adaptation, a delay of 1 second after the adapting stimulus is turned off. And you see that the adaptation effect actually kicks in only here. The first transient is not sensitive to adaptation. So maybe if you are fast enough, if you can perform, if you are good at it, you have a good classifier, or then you can do it fast enough before adaptation gets in.
But then why do we not have transfer? Then we should have transfer, because if I learn to use this information which is insensitive to the adaptation, then I should be able to do it also in another region.
Yeah, but that's a good point. What we know that if you are trained, let's say.
No longer learning then. There's no more learning at that point. You've learned in the beginning, but at the later session, there's no more learning.
No more learning. Yeah, you can't see adaptation here at the learning session.
No adaptation, but there's also no learning, so there's nothing to transfer.
There's no adaptation. I'm not sure I understand this part.
He's saying there's no adaptation at the later session.
No, I'm not saying there is no adaptation. I mean, you get adaptation, but you somehow avoid it if you can read it fast enough, if you do not depend on the adaptive. Well, I mean, here we see transfer after we get transfer when we train without adaptation. So this is a training schedule where you don't have adaptation during the training with the dummy trials, and then you test in adaptive conditions, and then you get transfer. Right? But if you train with adaptation, then you do not get transfer.
So that's my question.
Okay. So then the answer is that somehow the classifier you develop, because you start to learn in adaptation conditions, depends on the adaptation phase. Because initially you need a longer time to identify the target, right? So then you learn some features that depend on the adaptation, and you preserve these features while learning. Once you move to a new location, these features are not useful.
But the fact that you do improve so much suggests that you become somehow do become sensitive to the adaptive dependence.
Not necessarily, because you depend on local properties of this network. So let's say you learn some features of the network which somehow are useful for this location. But once you move to a new location, they are not useful. But these local features somehow are learned only in adaptive conditions. Like surround effect. These adaptation effects somehow involve surround effects, like lateral inhibition and excitation from surrounding region. So if you learn in the presence of these surround effects, your classifier, whatever, will have this kind of surround effect included. And then when you move to a new location. So you need to learn without adaptation. And this is the result that if you learn without adaptation, I mean in the dummy condition, then you can transfer it to an adaptive condition, to a new location with adaptation. Yeah, I guess this is it.
Any questions?
So in the interpretation of what you say is that adaptation is kind of surround effect. So adaptation basically limits the activity of beyond some very local network, and therefore there is no chance.
Yeah.
Without adaptation, the activity itself, not the learn, spreads to other conditions, to other parts, not locations, but other parts of the network.
Yeah, but not horizontally. I mean, some.
Not horizontally, but
yeah.
somehow copies of it, but adaptation is some sort of.
No, I mean, you see it in the hierarchy of visual areas that if you go up to V2, V4, then you lose. I mean, the location. Then the receptive fields are not that sensitive.
You're not talking about. You can do this for location also, right? And ask about transfer.
Again, so. No, I just didn't hear.
What?
I didn't hear your last sentence.
You can do a task not about orientation, but about location.
Right. Like
so
acuity.
you connect with two locations and ask about transfer of location.
Right.
And probably will be similar. So
I hope so, yeah.
So it's not that high networks are location invariant. I mean,
no, but still, I mean, if you speak about acuity, it's still kind of, I mean, it's still some kind of task that resolved in early vision by some relative activity between closed units, right? And this will show up in some activity at high level, which you depend on. I mean, this very high, fine hyper acuity tasks, they are not really spatial acuity tasks. They are kind of discrimination, pattern discrimination tasks.
but it could be also spatial discrimination.
Good. Yeah.
Let me state differently the interpretation which I understand what you're suggesting, and that is that like the mosaic being different in different parts of the retina, so if there's adaptation in one location, that location becomes different from other locations, and therefore they cannot be transferred.
Right.
The same pattern
Exactly.
discriminator, which is looking at it, sees something different there because it's adapting, and it doesn't see the same thing somewhere else.
Right.
It's not that the adaptation affects the other region, it's that it affects this region and makes it different than the others.
Exactly.
So is it similar to music that you hear a song or a tune, and then you hear it one more time and it's not the same, and one more time and it's even less, becomes boring? Is it similar?
Maybe, I don't know. But you have the same effect in the auditory system, and so it's possible that. Okay.
There's no adaptation, shouldn't be any adaptation in natural conditions, right? Because we constantly see different things.
Right.
So how come that we don't constantly improve in all these tasks? And we should learn locally and constantly, just because of our everyday experience.
Why do you think that we are not improving?
Well, I wonder if you take someone who is 40 years guesses that 20 years old would be better. No?
Well, there's some aging effect, especially in vision, the optic, and etc. But basically, we improve all the time. I mean, that's true. I mean, for improvement, the task. I mean, you need to have stimuli which are relevant for behavior. I mean, that's another condition for learning. If you just see stimuli around you, and they are not interesting, so you do not improve on anything. Right? Even for standard stimulus, I mean, there are so many things you can do, but you improve with a specific task, like with the texture. I mean, the Shaul and Mirav and Shaul shows, for example, when you improve on the detection of the pop-out, you do not improve on some kind of discrimination of the frame, which is presented the same number of times.
But you could argue that this is because of adaptation.
I'm not sure.
In condition, you will not have this adaptation because you constantly learn other things.
No, there are clear experiments showing this. It needs to be task relevant. Daphne. Yeah, this is it. This is no adaptation, and this is adaptation. This is what you asked?
In the second condition, you also have the view, and you do not have the intermediate no adaptation stimulus.
No, again, the
In
first
the adaptation condition, you have an intermediate stimulus.
Right.
You have that in the second location as well?
Well, if I have the intermediate stimulus in the second, well, these triangles are with the intermediate stimulus that remove adaptation in the first location and in the second location. Okay? This is the original condition, and in this condition we have the interleaving stimulus, so no adaptation, but here we remove the intermediate stimulus, so there is adaptation.
So that seems to contradict what Charles was trying to explain what you're saying. You do come back to the original stimulus. The system sees what it sees in an adapting network, but you still don't transfer.
No, they again. Okay, let me try again. So let's say that the initial response of the cell, of low-level cells, is not sensitive to adaptation. So if you can base your discrimination based on the initial response, then you are independent of adaptation and you can transfer. Okay? Only later responses, after 100 milliseconds or so, depend on surround effects, adaptation, and they add the specificity. They add this local nature to the encoding at this location. Okay? This makes the code at this location different from other locations. Okay? So with the blue line, you learn somehow very fast to concentrate on the first phase, the task phase. And there is no adaptation, so it is space invariant. And then when you get adapting condition, then you can use already the first phase, the task phase, which is not adaptation dependent. What I'm saying that during, I mean the explanation for this, right? I mean, I'll be happy to hear any other. I mean, okay. What I'm saying here that you learn in condition of adaptation, then you incorporate the surround effect, all this local property, to your learning, because initially you start with long exposures. In order to start the learning, you need 200 milliseconds. So your classifier somehow takes into account local properties, which are irrelevant. I mean, maybe it's stupid, but initially it needs a time, and because of that, it depends on the adaptation. But this happens in many kind of learnings, that you get conditioned on things that you may not want. So initially, you are exposed to adaptation and to local effects. So you learn, and when you get here, you still have these local features. You still rely on these local features. There is no reason not to rely on that.
So isn't the prediction that you should actually get worse in all other locations rather than not improve? Because you learn something that is now even more different because of the adaptation.
That is more different. Maybe, yeah. But, I mean, you get worse relative to this, but not. Maybe you see that it doesn't work and then you start again.
when the prediction of the explanation is basing the decision on early spiking or late, wouldn't say that if you now doing the training, when you start the training, you should do worse than you did before. Like every time, because before you started to adapt, the adaptation kicked in, you get different responses that you're not trained on. So like every time you start the training, you should do worse and then improve as more adaptation. But you don't see it.
Yeah, I guess there is a competition here between learning and adaptation. So the question is who is faster, which process is faster. So initially, I guess learning is faster than adaptation, but it takes time for adaptation to get in. So that's what you see here.
No, I'm saying it's a prediction for after you learn, after you saturate it.
After you saturate what?
To the best level. After day 3.
Right.
I said the beginning of day 4 you should rise. At the beginning of day 5 there should be compared to the last level of the day before. So you were most adaptive.
No, I mean if you learn in adaptation condition, then well,
then in the
I'm not
beginning
sure.
of the day there's no adaptation. The system is not adapted because you slept and
In the beginning of day 4 there is no adaptation. Yeah.
so you should do worse if you are basing a decision on the adaptive response. You should. I don't know, maybe it's not safe.
Well, you are performing at 80 milliseconds, much faster now. Right?
So this is also contradictory. So how can you rely on the adaptive response if you perform fast?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we need a detailed model for that in order to answer all this. Yeah, so.
One more for you. If you use very brief stimuli,
Right.
so this is only a transient.
No, you get, even for brief stimuli, you get, otherwise you wouldn't get the masking effect. I mean, the masking effect is interfering.
I'm saying you still need to use a long SOA, but the stimuli itself
It's brief, yeah.
can be very, very brief.
I mean, the stimulus is very brief. 10 seconds.
So it should be only a transient.
No, I don't think so. You get, even with very brief stimuli, you get resistance. In the retina. In the retina. This is still a strong intensity.
But they are masked.
Right, so then you get temporal integration.
Much later. That's much later.
Like 200 milliseconds. You start 200 milliseconds.
So the 10 milliseconds stimulus.
Right. But the retinal activity is longer.
That comes after between 240 and 200.
After each time, after?
Yes,
Oh, that's the so that is the system.
Any more questions? Yes. But if you compare it to higher cognitive learning, let's say you learn a sequence of signs or words like in a new language, and you do overlearning. At a certain point, there's a diminished effort. And the question is, how much can you overlearn in order to be optimal? Because it seems to me that it's in context, because you what you call adaptive, it means that similar signs are associated with similar signs, and there is some sort of higher cognitive evaluation.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, here you say perception,
Right.
but if you take by analogy signs or words that you are learning, and there is a point that you suddenly, in the next meeting, you see, this word is similar to this word, therefore you have a competency that is context interrelated. Although you might be bored with the signs, you still have some sort of an unconscious connection between them. So I think it can throw light on what's happening here.
Okay. check this issue.
Thank you.